Receipts up, hype down. Before we zoom into individual stories, I want to frame the week correctly because the pattern matters more than any single headline. A lot of people still talk about AI as if there is one race. Who has the smartest chatbot? That is way too shallow now. This week shows at least 4 races running at the same time. Race number 1 is product quality at scale. That is where OpenAI's GPT-5.5 Instant story lands. The default assistant has to be a little smarter, more concise, and more personalized because hundreds of millions of people are living in that product every day. Race number 2 is monetization. That is where the ChatGPT adds expansion matters. If free usage keeps growing, somebody has to pay for inference, and OpenAI is showing one answer. Race number 3 is enterprise maturity. That is where OpenAI's B2B signals, Microsoft's frontier firms framing, Anthropic's new services company, and NVIDIA plus ServiceNow all converge. The future of AI at work is not a clever sidebar assistant. It is delegated workflows, agent execution, evaluation, and governance. Race number 4 is infrastructure, and this is the hard wall everything runs into. OpenAI is building compute infrastructure for what it calls the intelligence age. NVIDIA is tying AI directly to energy abundance. Even when a company announces a software feature, the subtext is still compute. Can it scale? Can it stay cheap enough? Can it be trusted with harder tasks? Can it run with low enough latency to feel natural? So the reason this week is worth a mega video is that the stories reinforce each other. Better models create more usage. More usage creates pressure for monetization. Serious business use creates pressure for governance. Governance and autonomy Let's start with what I think is one of the most strategically important drops of the week. OpenAI's new voice stack in the API on May 7th, 2026. The headline is simple, but the implications are bigger than they look. OpenAI introduced 3 new audio models. GPT Realtime 2 is the flagship because it is framed as the first voice model with GPT-5 class reasoning. That wording matters. It means OpenAI is not pitching voice as a thin speech wrapper around a weaker model. They are pitching voice as a serious interface for more demanding tasks. Then there is GPT Real-Time Translate, which is designed for live multilingual voice experiences and is described as handling more than 70 input languages into 13 output languages, while keeping pace with the speaker. And then there is GPT Real-Time Whisper, a streaming transcription model aimed at low-latency speech to text. So why should you care? Because this is the clearest signal, yet that voice is moving from novelty to operating system layer. If a model can reason well enough while you speak, transcribe reliably, and translate on the fly, then voice stops being a gimmick and starts becoming a competitive interface for customer support, field operations, sales tooling, accessibility, language learning, internal enterprise copilots, and real-time assistants. It also lines up with a wider pattern across the industry. Companies do not just want better text generation. They want interfaces that reduce friction. Typing is friction. Copy-pasting is friction. Switching windows is friction. A voice model that can stay in the loop, call tools, and carry context starts to erase some of that. The catch is the same one we keep seeing. The nicer the interface feels, the more people use it, and the more expensive the underlying compute story can become. Real-time is expensive. Low latency is expensive. Speech in and speech out at scale is expensive. Still on May 7th, OpenAI also rolled out something that is very different in tone, but arguably just as important for the long-term shape of AI products. Trusted Contact in ChatGPT. According to OpenAI's announcement, this is an optional safety feature that allows adults to nominate a person they trust, like a friend, family member, or caregiver, who may be notified if automated systems and trained reviewers detect that the enrolled person may have discussed harming themselves in a way that indicates a serious safety concern. This is not a normal feature launch. It sits right at the intersection of product design, safety operations, privacy, and social expectations about what general-purpose AI systems are supposed to do when users bring deeply sensitive issues into the conversation. And there are at least two big ways to read it. The charitable read is that it is an example of frontier consumer AI products taking duty of care more seriously and trying to create a bridge from the model to real human support. The harder read is that the moment a product becomes emotionally or practically central to daily life, the company behind it will be expected to make increasingly complex judgment calls about intervention, escalation, reviewer involvement, and consent. So even if you are not focused on the self-harm prevention angle specifically, this story matters because it is a preview of the governance burden that comes with general-purpose AI becoming a real companion layer in people's lives. We are leaving the phase where companies could plausibly say this is just a neutral tool, and whatever happens in the chat is not really their domain. If millions of people use these systems for reflection, crisis, work, and decision support, then expectations change. And the feature is also a reminder that the frontier AI race is not only about capability gains. Safety features are becoming shipping product surfaces in their own right. That means every competitor has to think not just about what their model can do. Back on May 5th, OpenAI updated the default ChatGPT experience with GPT-5.5 Instant. On the surface, this is one of those product refresh stories that people can sleep on because it sounds incremental, smarter, clearer, more personalized. Fine. But the reason this is worth real attention is that the default model is where mass behavior changes. OpenAI explicitly framed Instant as the daily driver for hundreds of millions of people and said the update makes everyday interactions more dependable, more accurate, and more useful. That means even a small quality bump gets amplified across enormous usage volume. But there is another layer here that makes this more than a consumer product polish story. The system card for GPT-5.5 Instant says this is the first instant model OpenAI is treating as high capability in its cybersecurity and biological and chemical preparedness categories, with appropriate safeguards. That is a fascinating signal. It suggests the floor is rising. The everyday model is getting strong enough that even the default tier now lives in a more serious safety regime. If you zoom out, this is what model diffusion looks like in practice. Capabilities that once felt frontier migrate downward into the model people use for routine questions, summaries, emails, browsing, and work tasks. And when that happens, three things follow. First, user expectations go up fast because the default assistant feels better without asking anything extra from the user. Second, product risk goes up because the same model is now more capable in sensitive domains. Third, infrastructure demand goes up because better defaults generally produce more usage, longer sessions, and more trust in offloading real work. There is also a competitive angle. If OpenAI keeps making the default product more useful while rivals are still asking users to choose among confusing tiers, the simplest thing can win. People stay where the basic experience. Now let's talk about money, because a lot of AI commentary still treats monetization as an afterthought. On May 6th, OpenAI published one of the most quietly revealing documents of the week, B2B signals. If you care about enterprise AI adoption, this Anthropic's big signal this week landed on May 4th, and it says a lot about where enterprise AI adoption really is. Anthropic announced the formation of a new AI services company with Blackstone, Hellman and Friedman, and Goldman Sachs. The stated goal is to work with mid-sized companies across sectors to bring Claude into important operations, with applied AI engineers from Anthropic working alongside the new firm's engineering team to identify high-impact use cases, build custom solutions, and support customers over time. Now pause on that. The headline is not just that Anthropic wants more enterprise business. Everybody wants that. The important part is the services wrapper. This is an admission, or maybe a recognition, that a lot of the market still cannot capture value from frontier models through self-serve access alone. Plenty of companies do not need another chat window. They need workflow redesign, integration, guardrails, implementation help, and somebody who can stay involved after the first demo. So this announcement is really about distribution and adoption friction. The winner in enterprise AI may not simply be the company with the best model. It may be the company that can make high-value deployment feel less risky and less chaotic. And Anthropic is not alone in thinking that way. OpenAI is talking increasingly like a full-stack enterprise platform company. Microsoft is turning agents into an operating model. NVIDIA is climbing the stack with software and execution layers around infrastructure. Anthropic's services company fits that same trend from a different angle. It also opens up a strategic question. How much of enterprise AI is going to become services heavy, at least in the near term? If that share is large, then there is more moat in implementation and customer intimacy than many people expect. Google's strongest developer story this week came on May 5th with a major update to Gemini API File Search. The company announced 3 core upgrades: multimodal support, custom metadata filtering, and page-level citations. That combination is more interesting than it sounds because it is exactly the kind of feature bundle that makes retrieval augmented generation less hand-wavy and more production-worthy. Multimodal support matters because enterprise knowledge is not just plain text. It lives in scanned documents, charts, images, tables, slide decks, mixed media. Metadata filtering matters because production systems need more control over what gets retrieved and why. And page-level citations matter because they make it easier to verify where a model got something and to present grounded answers back to the user. In other words, this is not the flashiest AI story of the week, but it is one of the most useful. A lot of enterprise AI value over the next year is going to come from systems that are not fully autonomous geniuses, but simply much better at finding, grounding, and explaining information inside an organization's own material. Google is leaning directly into that. It also lines up with a broader trend in the week. Verifiability is becoming a product feature. OpenAI is talking about enterprise maturity and more delegated workflows. Microsoft is talking about evaluation. Google is making a core retrieval tool more source-aware. Those are all versions of the same pressure. Users and companies will delegate more once they can inspect more. I also think this story matters for builders who are not giant enterprises. If you are shipping an app on top of the Gemini API, the fastest way to make your product feel smarter is often not a bigger model. A day later, on May 6th, Google followed with a search story that feels like a direct answer to one of the biggest anxieties around generative search. In its official post on AI mode and AI overviews, Google said it is rolling out updates to help people find relevant websites, deep insights, and original content from across the web more easily. The new features include more direct links inside responses, relevant article suggestions, website previews, and pathways to personal perspectives and subscription content. That matters because one of the core critiques of AI search is that it can turn the open web into a hidden substrate under a machine-generated paragraph. Users get an answer. Publishers get less traffic, less credit, and less brand connection. Google's message here is basically, we hear that concern, and we are trying to make the generative layer a better guide to the web instead of a dead-end summary box. Whether it fully solves the tension is another question, but the direction is interesting. It suggests that even the companies pushing hardest into generative search know they need better mechanisms for source discovery and attribution. There is also a lesson here for the whole AI stack. If a system becomes more capable, it also becomes more obligated to show its homework in a way users can actually follow. That is why this story connects so naturally with Google's file search update. One is about building better grounded systems for developers. The other is about exposing more source pathways to end users in search. Same pressure, different surface. And strategically, it matters because Microsoft's most important conceptual post this week arrived on May 5th with its Frontier Firms argument. The company says software work has already been moving through 4 patterns of human-agent collaboration, and that those patterns are beginning to show up in other functions too. The 4 labels are author, editor, director, and orchestrator. Author means you produce the work and call on AI for help when needed. Editor means you set intent and revise what AI drafts. Director means you create a spec and hand off whole tasks for AI to execute in the background. Orchestrator means you design a system where multiple agents run in parallel across a workflow, flagging exceptions back to you. Honestly, that framing is one of the best shorthand models I have seen lately for explaining how AI changes work without getting mystical about it. And it pairs perfectly with OpenAI's B2B signals data from the same week. The firms pulling ahead are not merely using more prompts. They are moving down that ladder toward more delegated and more orchestrated work. Microsoft also emphasizes the organizational side: culture, manager behavior, skill building, incentives. That is another good corrective to the usual discourse. People love to ask which model is best, but in actual organizations, the more important question is whether people know how to use any of them effectively, safely, and repeatedly. A mediocre operating model can waste a great model. A strong operating model can extract a lot of value from an only very good model. So this is not just leadership jargon. It is a real map for how agentic work adoption might look over the next year. If you are watching the enterprise market, the thing to pay attention to is not whether the other Microsoft story from May 5th is less flashy, but maybe more foundational over time. Microsoft announced new agreements with the Center for AI Standards and Innovation in the US and the AI Security Institute in the UK to advance the science of AI testing and evaluation. The company said the work includes collaborative testing of Microsoft's frontier models, assessment of safeguards, and efforts to mitigate national security and large-scale public safety risks. That matters for at least three reasons. First, it reinforces that evaluation is no longer a sidecar document you publish after a launch. It is becoming part of the product and policy stack. Second, it shows that frontier model companies increasingly need a public story for how claims about safety and robustness are tested outside purely internal processes. Third, it creates a competitive pressure on everybody else. As capabilities climb, it gets harder to say trust us. Our red team looked at it. Customers, governments, and the public are going to want more formal methods, more external relationships, and clearer language around what exactly was tested and what was not. This also connects to some of the other stories from the week in a useful way. OpenAI's Instant System card raised the safety posture of a default model. Google's File Search update improved grounding and citations. NVIDIA plus ServiceNow stressed safe enterprise agent execution. Different companies, different layers, same direction of travel. Trust mechanisms are being productized. And once that starts happening, evaluation itself becomes part of market competition. The company that can move fast and still demonstrate credible testing may earn deployment opportunities others cannot. So while this is not on May 5th, NVIDIA and ServiceNow announced new autonomous AI agents for enterprises, and this story is worth. Now we get to what might be the deepest story of the week, even though it looks like an infrastructure niche at first glance. On May 7th, NVIDIA published a post around the Genesis mission featuring U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright and NVIDIA's Ian Buck. The framing was blunt. American leadership in AI runs through American leadership in energy. And the post ties that claim to NVIDIA's AI for Science initiative plus massive coming systems, including a 100,000 GPU Vera Rubin system called Solstice. This is where the conversation jumps from software hype to physical reality. We can talk all day about better reasoning, voice, agents, retrieval, and monetization, but all of it depends on actual electricity, actual data centers, actual networking, actual cooling, and actual memory supply. That is why I keep saying the most important subtext across the whole week is compute. OpenAI wants richer voice experiences and more agentic workflows. Google wants broader generative search and better multimodal retrieval. Enterprises want more delegated systems. Great. Where exactly do those tokens run? At what latency? At what cost? Under what power constraints? NVIDIA's five-layer cake metaphor in the Genesis mission post: energy, chips, infrastructure, models, applications, is useful because it reverses the usual way consumers think about AI. Most people see the application first, but at industrial scale, the stack starts from the ground up. If energy gets constrained, application dreams get constrained. If deployment speed lags demand, software roadmaps get distorted. So this is not just an energy policy story. It is an AI capacity story. And I think it also helps explain why the big players are moving in such different directions at once. Some are improving. I also want to make room for the open model angle, because if you only follow giant platform announcements, you can miss the structural pressure coming from open releases. Mistral 3 is a good example of the kind of story still shaping the landscape this week. On its official page, Mistral describes a family that stretches from small dense models at 3 billion, 8 billion, and 14 billion parameters all the way up to Mistral Large 3, a sparse mixture of experts model with 41 billion active and 675 billion total parameters. The company emphasizes Apache 2.0 licensing, multimodal and multilingual capabilities, and deployment paths from edge use cases to enterprise workflows. Why is that relevant in a week dominated by OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and NVIDIA? Because open models do three jobs in the market. First, they put pricing pressure on closed platforms by giving developers and enterprises another reference point. Second, they enable deployment patterns that are strategically important, including on-prem, in VPC, edge, or custom-tuned environments. Third, they keep reminding buyers that model capability is only one part of the value equation. Control matters. Portability matters. Fine-tuning freedom matters. Latency and privacy lanes matter. So even if the loudest mainstream stories this week came from larger closed ecosystems, the open side is still shaping how the rest of the market behaves. And practically speaking, that open pressure is one reason enterprise buyers have more leverage than they used to. If a closed vendor is too expensive, too rigid, or too slow to customize, there is a stronger alternative set than there was even a year ago. That does not mean open models win every task. So what is the real takeaway from the week once you stop looking at the headlines one by one? For me, it is this: nearly every exciting AI story in 2026 is now also I want to spend extra time on the voice story because it is very easy to underrate if you still think AI products are mainly about typing. A serious real-time voice stack changes the market in three ways at once. First, it changes how often people use the product. Text assistants still ask a lot from the user. You have to stop, type, structure your request, and often babysit the output. Voice lowers that activation energy. If the assistant can understand you naturally, respond quickly, and keep context while you move, then the number of moments where using AI feels worthwhile increases. That sounds like a convenience detail, but it is actually a usage explosion detail. Second, voice changes where the product can live. A typed assistant is strongest at the desk. A voice assistant can move into the car, the warehouse, the shop floor, the call center, the hospital corridor, the home, and the field service route. That means the interface story becomes a geography story. Third, voice changes what multilingual capability means in practice. Translation that is good enough and fast enough can turn a previously regional product into something much closer to a global layer. That is why OpenAI's translation angle matters so much here. It is not just a cool demo. It is a market expansion lever. Now, there is a flip side. Voice is one of the cleanest examples of why better AI can become more expensive AI. Real-time interaction is demanding. You cannot hide latency inside a long response composition the way you sometimes can with text. Streaming audio in, reasoning over it, handling interruption, possibly calling tools, then producing speech back out fast enough to feel natural is a very different operating burden. So when we talk about voice becoming more central, we should also hear the quiet capital expenditure story underneath it. Somebody has to pay for that smoothness. Somebody has to provision for bursts. Somebody has to optimize model size, routing, and network behavior so the magic feeling survives at scale. This is also one reason I think the voice race will sort the market in interesting ways. Not every company can afford to compete at the highest real-time quality level. Some will specialize. Some will rely on partnerships. Some will target narrower enterprise environments where usage is easier to model. But the companies that can make voice feel smart. Another lane I want to slow down on is trust, because the Google and Microsoft stories this week point to something broader than individual features. For the last couple of years, a lot of AI product conversations have treated trust like an after-the-fact question. Build the powerful system first, then ask how to communicate confidence or uncertainty later. That approach does not scale very well once these systems start touching work, research, customer support, or search behavior at mass volume. What Google did this week is interesting because it attacked the problem from both sides. On the developer side, Gemini File Search got multimodal support, custom metadata filtering, and page-level citations. On the user side, AI Mode and AI Overviews got stronger pathways out to the web through direct links, previews, and article suggestions. Put those together and you get a clear product thesis. If people are going to use generated answers more often, they need better ways to inspect the underlying material. That sounds obvious, but it is not how many AI systems have been designed. Too many systems still reward a kind of black box confidence. They sound smooth, and the user has to do extra work to verify anything important. The companies that solve that badly will hit a trust ceiling. The companies that solve it well can unlock more delegation. And that is where the Microsoft evaluation story fits in too. You can think of this as a ladder. Internal evaluation is one rung. External testing is another rung. Grounded retrieval is another rung. Visible citations and accessible source links are another rung. Each rung makes it a little easier for a human being or an organization to say, yes, I will use this for something more important than a toy task. So the biggest insight here is that trust is becoming a user experience discipline. It is about what the product exposes, not only what the model internally knows. If your product can show where an answer came from, why that source was selected, and how to inspect the original context, you are not just reducing hallucination anxiety. You are increasing the number of workflows where the system. If we pull together the OpenAI B2B Signal story, Anthropic's new services company, Microsoft's frontier firms framing, and NVIDIA plus ServiceNow's enterprise agent stack, we can sketch a pretty good picture of what the enterprise agent playbook is becoming. Step 1 is not full autonomy. Step 1 is scope delegation. Firms begin by finding repetitive, high-volume, painful workflows where the upside is clear and the blast radius is manageable. That might be coding assistance, internal support triage, document routing, compliance prep, or research synthesis. Step 2 is tool and context integration. This is where a lot of projects stall. The model may be good, but if it cannot see the right documents, systems, permissions, and workflow state, the output stays superficial. Step 3 is human review design. This is the part the hype often skips. Valuable agent systems are rarely fire and forget. They tend to be review and release, or review by exception, or escalation on uncertainty. Step 4 is governance. Who owns the agent? Who can change its tools? Who sees the logs? Who audits the actions? Who decides what cannot be automated? And step 5 is cultural adoption. Managers have to know when to ask for delegated work. Workers have to know how to specify and check tasks well, and the organization has to learn where automation is actually useful rather than performative. That may sound less cinematic than the phrase autonomous agents, but it is the difference between a real operating model and a demo reel. This is also why Anthropic services bet makes sense. Many firms do not need a better chatbot. They need help moving through those 5 steps without creating chaos. It is why NVIDIA and ServiceNow talk so much about governance and workflow context. It is why Microsoft's author, editor, director, orchestrator model is useful. And it is why OpenAI's frontier firms data is such a telling signal. The firms getting ahead are likely doing more of this organizational work, not just buying access to smarter models. One of the most useful ways to read this week is through business models, because that is where a lot of the real strategy becomes visible. OpenAI's ad story says consumer AI still needs more monetization rails. The B2B Signals piece says enterprise AI value is increasingly tied to depth of use, not just broad shallow adoption. Anthropic Services Company says part of the enterprise market may be monetized through implementation and ongoing hands-on support, not merely model access. And the open model lane, represented here by Mistral, keeps a floor under how much control and portability buyers can demand. Those are very different revenue logics. Ads scale with attention and intent. Enterprise platforms scale with usage, seats, and integration value. Services scale with deployment friction and customer intimacy. Open models can scale through hosting, support, ecosystem pull, or enterprise packaging around free weights. So what? The important point is that no single business model has fully won the frontier AI market yet. That is why we keep seeing companies attack from multiple angles at once. A vendor may want subscription revenue, enterprise contracts, API usage, and some kind of ecosystem or marketplace layer. But every monetization path creates trade-offs. Ads raise trust questions. Heavy enterprise customization can slow growth scale. Services add operational weight. Open ecosystems may create pricing pressure downstream. This is one reason the market still feels so dynamic. The technical race is intense, but the economic shape of the category is still being negotiated in public. And for builders and buyers, that is actually good news. It means leverage is still available. If you are an enterprise buyer, you can push vendors on price and deployment because alternatives are stronger than they used to be. If you are a product builder, you can design around niche value instead of assuming you have to become the next giant general assistant. And if you are a viewer trying to close the deep dive section, I want to make the compute point as clearly as possible because it is the one theme that binds nearly every major story together. When people hear compute bottleneck, they often imagine a vague shortage headline. But what it really means at the product level is more concrete. It means certain features can feel sluggish when demand spikes. It means certain enterprise deployments become too expensive to scale broadly. It means companies are forced to route traffic, trim context, cap usage, or segment product tiers in ways that users may never fully see. It means some ideas that look brilliant in a launch post get quietly delayed in practice because the operating math does not work yet. Real-time voice is compute-sensitive. Large-scale retrieval over rich multimodal corpora is compute-sensitive. Agent systems that call multiple tools, reason across context, and manage longer sessions are compute-sensitive. Search products that generate rich answers for huge audiences are compute-sensitive. Now add memory bandwidth, interconnect, networking topology, and power availability, and you start to understand why NVIDIA keeps sounding like an infrastructure company first and an AI company second. This is also why OpenAI's infrastructure build-out story matters beyond one company. It is a clue that the next phase of competition will reward not just model inventiveness, but deployment muscle. And that deployment muscle is expensive. So the correct way to hear a lot of product news now is as a question. Can this company actually afford to let this behavior become normal? If the answer is yes, that is a moat. If the answer is not yet, then the product may still be strategically important, but the rollout path will be bumpier. That does not make the model race less exciting. It makes it more grounded. The companies shaping the next 2 years will be the ones that can turn impressive demos into dependable, economically sustainable habits for huge numbers of people. That is the week in AI from May 3rd through May 7th, 2026. If I had to tell you what to watch next, it would be four things. Number one, voice. Not because it is flashy, but because it is becoming a real interface layer for serious work. Number two, enterprise delegation. The most meaningful adoption stories are shifting from prompting to workflow design. Number three, source visibility. The products that make people trust generated answers more will usually be the ones that make sources easier to inspect, not harder. And number four, infrastructure. Do not let anybody convince you power, chips, networking, and memory are boring side topics. They are the substrate of the whole market now. If you enjoyed this longer breakdown, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and send it to the one person in your group chat who still thinks this is all just about one chatbot beating another chatbot on a benchmark. And if you want the next mega video to go deeper on one lane, drop a comment with your pick. Do you want a full Enterprise Agents episode, a full